Hey, it's Jacob, and I'm excited to announce that my brand new book, Leading with Vulnerability, is now officially available for pre-order. Learn why inside of organizations, I argue that you should not, I repeat, should not be vulnerable, but instead, you should lead with vulnerability. There is a key distinction between those two things. Leading with vulnerability is about combining competence and connection. I interviewed over 100 CEOs at companies around the world to figure out exactly how to do that. I also surveyed 14,000 employees in partnership with leadership firm DDI. And the book explores a lot of fascinating topics. We got some early endorsements for the book, and I just wanted to share some of them with you in case you're having doubts about this. So Seth Godin, one of the people who endorsed the book, he says, this is a well-researched, compelling book about something we spend far too little time thinking about. Being human, it works. Patrick Lencioni, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, he wrote many best-selling books. He's been a guest on this show. He says, Jacob takes a wonderfully thorough look at one of the most important and lacking qualities in leaders, and he does so with a raw and honest approach that makes his point all the more powerful. I just want to read one more endorsement from you that we got from Mel Robbins, mega best-selling author. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Mel as well. She says, this book is a serious game changer because we've been thinking about leadership all wrong. Whether you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 or an entrepreneur with a team of two, Leading with Vulnerability is packed with strategies and practical tools to help you become a leader who knows how to make an impact. We've got a lot more endorsements, far more than this. I'm very, very excited to share them all with you. I hope you decide to pre-order a copy of the book, which you can do at leadwithvulnerability.com. The book is coming out October 3rd, and if you pre-order a hardcover copy, you're going to get access to some really cool bonuses, including some exclusive CEO interviews with the CEOs of GE, American Airlines, Edward Jones, and a couple others. I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the book, so a couple chapters before the book even comes out. You're also going to be invited to an exclusive and private webinar that I'm going to be hosting where I'll be sharing some of the concepts and ideas from the book. Again, all of this is going to be happening before the book comes out. Head over to leadwithvulnerability.com.
If two people are accountable, no one's accountable. And accountability and responsibility are very different things.
Welcome to another episode of Great Leadership. My guest today, Scott Boatwright, Chief Restaurant Officer at Chipotle, responsible for over 110,000 employees in 3,200 stores. So accountability is the person who's actually responsible, like the person that you go to when something goes wrong or when something goes right. And responsibility is the people who implementing it, the one point of contact that you go to, right? There's a big difference between accountability versus responsibility. So what is that difference?
We all have a shared responsibility to the team, but there has to be one person accountable. When things go well, what person can I go recognize? And when things don't go well, what person can I go talk to about redirecting or improving? And I think that's a critical component of leadership.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Great Leadership. My guest today, Scott Boatwright, Chief Restaurant Officer at Chipotle, responsible for over 110,000 employees in 3,200 stores. Scott, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Jacob. We're happy to be here and looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, likewise. So a ton of questions for you, but before we jump into all those questions, for the very few people out there who are not familiar with Chipotle, can you give us a little bit of background information about the company? How big is your footprint in terms of total employees, total stores, countries that you're in?
Yeah, great questions, Jacob. So the brand was founded in Denver, Colorado back in 1993 by a gentleman by the name of Steve Ells, who was actively involved in the brand for, its first little over 25 years of growth and through lots of transition. There was a period of time that McDonald's became an investor in Chipotle back in its early days and really supported the brand through what you could perceive as hyper growth for a period of a few years, and then eventually took Chipotle out to IPO, and that's when McDonald's exited the business. The brand has grown in fits and starts over its now 30-year history Most recently, I joined the brand in 2017 at the behest of Steve Ells and encouraging me and prodding me to join what I believe to be an iconic American brand that I had a lot of affinity for. I was a consumer of the brand long before I joined, and it has been an incredible 6 years. Today, we're at 3,200 restaurants across North America and Western Europe. And so we're obviously in almost every state in the U.S. We're not in Alaska or Hawaii today.
Not yet.
But we are not yet. And we're moving to our third province in Canada. So we're already in British Columbia, Ontario, and now moving to Alberta.
Okay.
In Western Europe, you can find us in Paris, London, as well as Frankfurt, Germany, with aggressive growth plans in both Europe and Canada.
Okay, very cool. And then what does a chief restaurant officer do? So I've interviewed close to 800 people on this show now. You are the first chief restaurant officer I've ever spoken with.
That's fantastic. So today I have responsibility for all of operations across the organization. So I have responsibility for our 110,000 employees out in the field, and then also have responsibility for a few functions within our support center, primarily the HR function, which we call people experience across the company today, as well as ops services, which is really an arm that is in support of what we're trying to accomplish in our field.
Okay. So I wanted to start our conversation by, it was actually an article that I read, I think it was in 2018. And I can't remember where I read it, but it basically said that the stock was near an all-time high at the time. The share price was around $750 a share. Then the article went on and said that it was obviously one of the most successful restaurant chains in history. And then there were some food safety issues at the time in 2018, and the stock was cut in half to around 300 something a share. Those numbers look tiny today because you are now, I think, at an all-time high, right? Over $2,000 a share. And I was going through your LinkedIn profile to see some of the things that you were responsible for. And I just want to read some of these things so people can get a sense of some of the things that you put into place. So some of them more than doubled the share price, solved economic model in Canada, relaunched or realigned field leadership and G&A to limit above store leaders' remit, shifted from 15 stores to 8, guest experience. You did a lot in there. Developed winning strategy for operations. So, as I was going through your LinkedIn profile, I couldn't help but wonder if you did so much when you were there, was Chipotle just a disaster when they brought you in and they just, flying by the seat of their pants? Because it seems like you came in and just transformed the company and did things that, you would think somebody would have already been thinking about.
Sure, and I could see how you would have that vantage point, Jacob. What I found in 2017 was an organization full of extraordinary people and extraordinary talent that were hyper-focused on exceptional culinary and delivering what we believe to be the uniquely Chipotle experience. And so the bones of the organization were well intact, had a great structure and foundation, and just needed a little increased direction on how to create system standards and processes that were scalable, that allowed the brand to achieve its extraordinary growth targets. And the year I showed up in 2017, we had just over 1,900 restaurants. And that year we were growing at about 10% new restaurant growth. And so what we lacked was a level of sophistication around leadership development resources specific to developing leaders to take on larger spans of responsibility, which is a recipe for disaster, if you will, Jacob, in a high growth oriented organization. And so, what I did very, very early on was establish, again, system standards and processes, set the hierarchy such that we could achieve our long-term goals for both organic restaurant growth and new restaurant growth. So we devised an organization that had support from all angles of the organization to ensure that we were all fundamentally geared towards one like-minded scenario. And that was, if you were in a support function in this company, then your job was to support anyone who is serving a guest. And so just really reorienting the organization towards that endeavor had a meaningful shift in how we supported our restaurants and put us in such a favorable position to have achieved what we accomplished over the last 5-6 years.
When you say system, standards, and process, maybe you can give a couple examples, right? Because I think a lot of people have been to a Chipotle. I used to live within walking distance of a Chipotle, and I was there all the time. And anybody who's ever been to one knows that you walk in, you have a very limited menu, and it's kind of like an assembly line, right? You go down the list, people ask you what you want in your burrito, your taco, or whatever, and then you pay at the end. And just visually, it seems like a very simple process, right? Visually, you walk in and you're like, okay, it's basic. There's just somebody who's going to put guacamole and cheese, and then I pay at the end. But it seems like on the back end, it's actually a very complex process at scale across all these 3,200 stores. So when you talk about system, standards, and process, what were some of the things that you had to put in that weren't there before?
Yeah, great question, Jacob. And so on the surface, you're absolutely right. When you walk into a Chipotle, it seems very basic, very simple. The guest is building the order from start to finish down the line, which flows in a linear production flow from tortilla to the cash register. What you don't see is all the hours of work that go into the AM shift, where we have team members in our restaurants and it looks like a farmer's market. And so you have, anywhere from 5 to 10 team members in there pre-opening with pots, pans, knives, cutting boards, and preparing wholesome, fresh ingredients from scratch every morning in every single restaurant. And so my challenge was a unique challenge, Jacob, in that I needed to protect what made us special as an organization. And so what I mean by that is we have 53 ingredients, most that you can source and buy at your local Whole Foods or otherwise. And most of that produce is grown within 500 miles of each restaurant. And so we're bringing in loads and loads of fresh green leaf lettuce, peppers, bell peppers, onions. And, it would be very easy to commercialize a lot of those ingredient preparation techniques that we use today, whether that's choppers or taking that product out to commissary and receiving it in bags. And I'm often challenged by people outside the organization saying, why don't you move in that direction to simplify the operating model? And at the end of the day, Jacob, fresh just tastes better. Yeah. And there's no substitute. You can make those decisions and it's death by 1,000 cuts, in my opinion. And you lose flavor, you lose quality, and it is not the same experience. So my unique challenge, Jacob, how do I keep this place special? Keep it authentically Chipotle, but provide systems that allow us to scale this farmer's market, if you will, in 3,200 restaurants every single day with, what is typically transient labor, as most often the food service environment is where people go for their first job, learn basic job career skills, and then move on, either off to college or off to other endeavors. So that's the challenge for me, and that's what we needed to solve for.
Well, it's funny you mentioned freshness because my wife and I were talking the other day, and we love Mexican food, and we eat a lot of Mexican restaurants. And every time we go to a Mexican restaurant, and sometimes you'll pay like, $20, $25 for a burrito. And whenever we go to these Mexican restaurants, we still say, we still like Chipotle better. Like, it's just the guacamole. The guacamole at Chipotle is legendary, right? And just, we were literally 3 days ago, we're like, remember one of those burritos you used to get barbacoa and guacamole and sour cream? And you go to some of these other restaurants and, those burritos are okay. And I'm talking not fast food restaurants, but actual like sit down restaurants. And still the Chipotle burrito, I think in many cases is better than some of the like fancy burritos out there that you can get. So I like that you mentioned the farmers market. And so can you give a few examples? So when you came in and you had these challenges, like what were some of the specific questions that you were faced with? Because how do you create a farmer's market in 3,200 stores simultaneously every morning? Was that literally one of the questions that you were being forced to answer, or was it more granular than that?
Yeah. I think it was probably more granular than that, Jacob, in that, it was, as you know, when I joined, the organization had a few scares, food safety scares, that caused us to push pause on a lot of the in-restaurant initiatives that were underway to try to solve for or mitigate against food safety risk. And so what I did very early on as a key priority for the organization was put in process and standards as well as policy specific to food safety to protect what we do in our restaurants every day. And just as a reminder, Jacob, we don't use additives, preservatives, substitutes, conditioners, etc., which oftentimes become food safety risk mitigation tactics or strategies. So I say that to say we don't have a safety net at Chipotle today. And so we have to be hyper vigilant on how we deliver the experience every day across 3,200 restaurants, by the way, on our way to 7,000 here in North America. And so if you don't have the right structure in place and the process and policy in place, you can see very quickly how things could go awry. And so we have quickly established a culture around food safety and put in mechanisms that solve for and took a lot of the risk out of the human error factor in each restaurant to again, mitigate that risk.
So when you talk about a system, are we talking about a system of like logistics? The truck shows up every morning at this time, this amount of groceries gets unloaded, this person unloads it, you guys chop, is that what you mean when you say system? And is that something that just didn't exist before?
Yeah. So, well, there were things that existed before, Jacob, that just weren't followed up on to the degree in which they needed to be, right? And so that's how things get off the rails. I think we talked about earlier, when I arrived, we had the field leader level, which is the first level above restaurant. So think this is a district manager, area supervisor, and a lot of other brands, had too many responsibilities, right? And one of those were too many restaurants that they had responsibility for. And it's always been my understanding and belief in my 30-year career that any individual in any organization at any level in the hierarchy can only manage effectively about 8 direct reports. And so we had field leaders running, upwards of 15, some 20 restaurants. And at that point, all you're doing is firefighting, Jacob. You're not really moving the business forward in a meaningful way. You're not developing the people that you are challenged to or you're supposed to be supporting every day. And so what happens is things get wobbly, things get missed, overlooked. And so really redesigning the organizational hierarchy was step one, and ensuring that no one in the organization had any more than 8 direct reports. So they could spend quality time on the development of their general managers in restaurant and ensure that the policies and practices that we had had in place and were creating were being followed, adhered to, and someone that would follow up on those mechanisms.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is exactly what I was looking for, kind of like some of the specifics of what you had to implement. So besides that, in terms of reducing the number of stores that somebody was responsible for, what were some of the other either policies or practices or systems that you put in place that you think helped turn the company?
Yeah, one of the first steps, one of the first policies I put into place was a zero tolerance policy around what we call the wellness check. And so when a team member enters a restaurant to begin work, they are met at the register with the on-duty manager who takes them through a wellness check just to ensure that they're healthy and safe to work. And so, and I say zero tolerance because I think that's an important note, Jacob. Oftentimes in our industry, unfortunately, people that are sick are forced to work, either by being forced by the manager of the establishment are pushed to work because they don't want to run short-staffed.
Yep.
And or the team member feels like I can't miss a day of work. I have a family to provide for, and so they feel compelled to work. And so on the heels of that policy that I established very early on, we began giving everyone 3 days of paid sick time, regardless of tenure in the organization. So at no point was a manager compelled to force a team member to work that was knowingly sick. And at no time did a team member feel compelled to have to work because they knew they were going to get paid for that sick time off. And that really changed the culture of allowing an employee to work in our back of house. Again, in most brands, not an issue, Jacob. In our brand, it's so prep intensive that an individual that works while sick can affect, hundreds of people because they're cutting, chopping, and dicing products in the back of the house.
Yeah. Okay. So, and that's an interesting policy as well, right? I mean, it makes sense, especially in the food business. Were there some other changes that you made as well?
Yeah, we did things like introduce digital HACCP, which is our HACCP control step to ensure that every product is temperature checked once an hour to ensure it remains either in its cold state or its hot state, which is very important to our industry. We also introduced incremental visits by our third-party food safety organization called EcoSure. It's been a long-standing partner of ours. And we do 4 audits annually on every restaurant. So think of an independent firm that comes in and assesses food safety processes in an organization. Okay. And we feel we're best in class today. And it's one we never take our eye off of because, again, it's so important for us from a risk mitigation standard or practice to always be on top of our game. So there were a multitude of things that we did. Early on, I established role clarity for every person up and down the hierarchy so that there was no confusion. I have an old adage that I've led with for many years that if 2 people are accountable, no one's accountable. And accountability and responsibility are very different things. And so I identified for every individual in the organization their top 5 accountabilities and how they'll be measured, rewarded, and promoted by, if you will, if they just follow these 5 things. And that role clarity paid huge dividends in the years that unfolded beyond 2017.
Can we dive into that a little bit in more detail? So you mentioned that there's a big difference between accountability versus responsibility. So what is that difference? And I'm wondering for leaders out there in different industries and different companies, if this is something that they can apply to their teams as well, as far as identifying, the top priorities, how they're going to be rewarded, incentivized. I think a lot of employees inside of organizations don't even know how they're being rewarded. Like if you go in to do an annual performance review or a check-in, I think a lot of employees out there are kind of like, I don't know what metrics you guys are looking at. I'm just coming with everything to defend myself. And I don't know what I'm supposed to be striving for in order to be able to get the best reviews. But in your case, it sounds like you were pretty transparent with all that.
You absolutely have to be, Jacob. I think in operations specifically, any operator worth their salt want to know 2 things. What's being measured and how are we keeping score? And you give them those guardrails and they can light the world on fire. And the difference between responsibility and accountability in a restaurant, I'll give you an example. Training has to happen, right? A lot of new people coming in and out of a restaurant. Typically, the industry average is about 150% turnover per restaurant. So you figure you're going to turn over this staff 1.5 times this year. So training has to be paramount from day one. Now, every manager in that building has a responsibility to ensure we're training everyone that comes in the door, right? Yeah. And so that's a shared responsibility. At the end of the day, if I don't have one person, one social security number accountable for training in that restaurant, then there's lack of clarity of follow-up. And so when I have an issue with training in one restaurant, I have one individual I need to have a conversation with. And that person will talk to the other folks on the team about shared responsibility, but there's one person accountable. And that's a very important delineation.
Yeah, no, that does make a lot of sense. So 150% turnover, all right? Obviously, that's massive. I mean, it's probably normal for the restaurant industry, but I'm sure a lot of companies out there, a lot of leaders are listening to this thinking, oh my goodness, in my software company or in my manufacturing company or my banking institution, if we had 150% turnover, we'd be freaking out. So for you, what have you figured out? Like, what strategies are you trying to implement when it comes to attracting and retaining talent? Because as we talked about earlier, all right, people come in, they're chopping chicken, they're making guacamole and stuff like that. And, for a lot of people, I'm assuming when they start working at Chipotle, some people are like, I'm just going to be here for a few months until I find something else. And some people are like, well, I can see a path forward where maybe I'm going to have my own Chipotle one day. So how do you attract and retain people in an industry that has such high turnover?
Yeah, Jacob. A couple of things that work in our favor. A is we have a really strong economic model. And so with such a strong economic model, and by way of that, we enjoy probably well above industry average restaurant level margin that allows us to pay a little more to our workers. And I think that's an important note. So our average wage as a company today is around just above $16 per employee per hour. And so that's an important note because we have industry leading benefits, at least I believe them to be industry leading benefits. I say that to say if we're having a conversation about pay with a team member, then our benefits can't work as hard for us as they need to, right? At the end of the day, that individual needs to put food on the table for their family at the end of the week, right? And benefits at this point, it's Maslow's hierarchy, if you will. Benefits at this point don't matter to me. What I need is to earn a fair wage such that I can pay my rent, make my car payment, and have groceries at the end of the week, right? And so we believe that, leading with an industry-leading wage, we can then layer on benefits to really enhance that overall experience for the team member. And today, our benefits include both mental, physical, as well as financial health benefits across a wide variety of activity, which also includes, we will pay for your college education, and we have over 100 debt-free degrees across multiple universities for an individual that wants to join the Chipotle brand. The other benefit we have as an organization is we're a high growth company. And so through that lens, we're able to provide opportunity at a very, very fast pace to anyone who joins our company. And you can go from signing on as a team member today to earning over $100,000 a year in about 3.5 years, Jacob. Wow. And so that's meaningful, right? Yeah. And that's without an advanced degree. Gosh, Jacob, that's without a degree at all. And so high growth coupled with great margins allows us to provide a wage that's affordable for the individual and benefits that work really, really hard. And then you couple everything I just said to you with growth opportunity and great culture, and that's how you solve the problem.
Remember, my brand new book, Leading with Vulnerability, is coming out October 3rd. Here is what the former CEO of the Home Depot said about the book. This book is a game changer for current and aspiring leaders. Jacob provides readers with a treasure trove of insights on how to connect with team members, unlock potential, and drive business performance. I wish I had this book when I was entering the business world. Again, this is from the former CEO of the Home Depot, Frank Blake. So I hope you decide to order your copy. Head over to leadwithvulnerability.com, pre-order a hardcover copy, get access to all sorts of really amazing bonuses that we have over there. How would you describe yourself as just a day-to-day leader?
I think a day-to-day in my role, especially my role now, it is about admitting that I don't have all the answers.
I talk about when we have company calls, I'll talk about what's going on, and I'll talk about what affects us. I think it's important as a leader to not make it all about you. It really very much is about the team.
If you set the framework up, if you set the environment up, it's more of the fact that people know that you're approachable and know that they can engage with you.
We make mistakes. I mean, we're not computer people. We're not computers, we're people. And all day long mistakes are made. All day long.
It's interesting to see how companies have evolved. I mean, I'm sure you can remember, right? You've been in the space for 30 years. I mean, 30 years ago, were companies talking about giving employees mental health, financial health? It used to be just kind of like, hey, we'll take care of some healthcare stuff for you. You show up to work, you do a job. And now companies are they're everything. They're your financial advisors. They're your wellness advisors. They're your almost parents in some way, your life coaches in some capacity. Do you see that the role of the organization is just completely transformed as far as what the purpose of it is in relation to employees?
Yeah, massively, Jacob. 30 years ago, the goal was to wring out as much penny profit in the organization as you could possibly find, right? And gosh, we probably rewarded people for paying less in certain markets to drive as much margin to the bottom line as possible. And back in those days, you had lots of unskilled labor available in the workforce. That if you had an individual that wasn't satisfied with pay or wasn't satisfied with what we offered as an organization, you just rotated them out and hired someone different. And so, turnover in this, again, 30 years now, it's running around 150%. It's been that way for 30 years. But it becomes increasingly difficult because of a few macro factors that has put pressure on our industry. I think it's a couple of things, Jacob. I think number one, Americans are having fewer and fewer children today. So think fewer kids that are coming into the workforce. You couple that with the fact that most kids that are coming up in the U.S. today have sights set on going to college and then coming out of college earning well beyond what this industry will be able to pay. Forget willing, be able to afford. And then this is a lightning rod, conversation. But absent immigration reform in this country, we're going to have a real serious problem on who's going to do the unskilled labor, whether that's retail, hospitality, food and leisure, or otherwise. Who's going to do the work? And immigrants have built this country from its very inception. And so we need a solution, a bipartisan solution to immigration reform to help us solve the problem. And so all that just creates this perfect storm of labor pressure in both retail and hospitality. And so that's the big challenge today. And so employers that want to be effective, that want to deliver, have to get creative in how they solve that unique challenge, whether that's pay, benefits, culture, or all three of the above.
It's interesting because there are a lot of these macro factors that I don't even know how many businesses out there pay attention to, right? I mean, one of them that you mentioned, for example, besides immigration, is the fertility rate. And I think in the United States, we're not, if memory serves correct, we are actually, our birth rate is not high enough to replace the death rate. So our replacement rate is actually low. So we're not having enough kids in the United States to support the number of people who are dying in the United States every year. So we're getting an older and older population. And I know other parts of the world are far worse off than we are. But that's interesting that that's one of the elements and the things that you would be paying attention to, because a lot of people you might be surprised to hear that that's something that you're looking at. So I think that's very interesting. How much of your role is paying attention to these macroeconomic factors for what's going on out there?
Yeah, Jacob, it's critical to our 3 to 5 year strategy. So we're at 3,200 restaurants today at 110,000 employees, and we're on our way to 7,000 restaurants. And, without talent available and ready, that growth story doesn't play out. And so it's incredibly important for our organization. It's the one thing that keeps me up at night. We are fortunate, as I sit here today, to have robust staffing across the enterprise and robust succession planning, meaning people ready to take on larger roles. But that doesn't happen by chance, right? That's a strategic decision that we made many years ago to ensure we had the right leadership development resources in place, that we keep people green and growing and prepared to take on larger roles in their career. I
wanted to talk a little bit about the role that technology plays, because I was reading some articles about your use of AI, machine learning. I think there was even something I read about RFID to track certain food items. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing with technology and what kind of a role it's playing in the evolution or transformation of Chipotle?
Absolutely, Jacob. So we have made strategic investments through our Cultivate Next fund in a couple of different cobotic scenarios in an effort, Jacob, I want to be clear, in an effort to really remove a lot of the mundane menial tasks in our restaurants today. Call it the work that nobody just enjoys doing, so that we can redeploy that labor towards customer-facing initiatives, whether that's creating bowls, burritos, and tacos in our digital ecosystem or supporting our guests down the make line. And so think one investment we made is in an autonomous robot we call Chippy. And so what Chippy does is Chippy makes chips, just as it sounds. And so today we fry fresh chips every single restaurant, every single day for about 2 hours to 4 hours, depending on volume. And then we add salt and lime juice to those chips, all done by hand in restaurant every single morning. And it's a long, tedious process to stand over a fryer for 4 hours. I'm sure that doesn't sound like fun to you, Jacob, but someone has to do it. And, again, this is one of those moments where I needed to keep what was uniquely special about Chipotle special, right? I could have taken that out to commissary, but they're just not as good. Yeah. And so what is a viable solution? Chippy. And so Chippy can do all that work, fry the chips, put the salt on, add the citrus, and shake them up, and then load them ready for bagging without a team member ever standing near the machine. They literally plug in the volume of chips they need, hit a button, and Chippy goes to work.
Wow.
And so that's how we're leveraging technology, which we like to dub as, again, cobotics, right? So robots working alongside human, not the human experience, not replacing humans.
Is Chippy
That's
already?
What I think is important.
Yeah, is Chippy already rolled out in a bunch of stores?
Well, we have one model, beta model, that's in our Fountain Valley store here in California.
Okay.
That is going through some rigorous testing, but we hope to expand into more restaurants in the near future.
Do you also see, I don't know, a choppy, like chopping up? And by the way, if you name it choppy, I get $1 for every robot.
Every time it's used.
Yeah, but so you could extend this into things like chopping vegetables, into things of that nature, and removing humans from that kind of menial, mundane work and get them to focus more on the, like you said, the customer service and actually creating the products, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of concern, as you know, of AI and automation and the role that it's going to play inside of organizations. And I remember this was years ago. This must have been, 8 years ago. I was talking to the chief people officer of McDonald's at the time. And McDonald's, they've been implementing technology and kiosks in all their stores. And I remember at the time, again, 8-10 years ago, and I asked the chief people officer, I said, a lot of people are concerned as one of the world's largest employers that you're going to have kiosks everywhere and you're going to get rid of the people and it's going to have a negative impact. And he told me that pretty much what you said, that they were using these kiosks as a way to remove the mundane labor. They weren't actually decreasing their headcount in stores. They were keeping it the same and in some cases increasing it, but focusing on that customer experience, having more people who would come to your table and say, hey, can I get you anything else? Is there anything else you need? How was your food? So it sounds like in your case, it's similar, where technology is a way to create more of that humanity in your restaurants by getting the people to focus more on the people things.
That's right. More time spent on guest-facing initiatives, whether that's caring for a guest down the line, table touches in the dining room, ensuring that the beverage station is properly stocked and ready to go, and just engaging with our guests in different areas of the restaurant and different touch points is really the primary goal there. And, again, just removing those jobs that really no one wants to do. I can envision down the road we have something, because we, believe it or not, go through a large volume of wares in every restaurant every single day, right? And so having a machine that takes care of all that dishwashing at the end of a shift that we don't have a team member standing back there for a couple of hours, and at a dish sink that's not enjoyable work, right? And so another important initiative and investment we made this last year was in a company called Hyphen. And so what Hyphen is building for us, and we're working with our teams here, our innovation teams here at Chipotle, is a table that will build bowls that come in through our digital ecosystem. And so on top of the table, you'll see a team member still serving guests face to face. Under the bottom of the table, bowls will be fired and built underneath the table and then capped and packaged by a team member at the end of the table.
Interesting.
And so we think, obviously think more, linear production, automated production flow from tortilla to cash. And so it's different things like that we're investing in to really enhance the team member experience.
Chippy, choppy, washy. I think I'm going to retire soon, Scott. So
I love it.
It's interesting that you mentioned some of those things, right? Because I know, for example, when I go to Chipotle, one of the things that I like, and I'm sure a lot of people like, is you can talk to the person who's making your food, and you can say, oh, can you put like a tiny bit more guacamole on there, or can you just put like a little bit more meat? And I know that when you have technology that's doing that, you eliminate that, right? Because I'm assuming the technology is going to have everything exactly measured, 4 ounces or 5 ounces of chicken, like half a cup of guacamole, and that's it. And a lot of people really love talking to the person to get that personalized, customized burrito that they feel is just for them. A little bit of extra guacamole or cheese or sour cream. How are you going to offset and balance that like customized human component with the automation component? And one of the reasons why I bring this up is because Starbucks, I think there was a time when a lot of people were very concerned, and actually in San Francisco they have this. I forgot what the name of the machine is. I think it's called Cafe X, and it's basically this robotic arm that will make coffee for you. And so you go to a cafe, and there's no humans in there, and you push the button that you want, and this robot will make you a cappuccino or a latte or whatever. And when a lot of people saw that, they said, "Oh my goodness, Starbucks is going to go out of business." That's the end of Starbucks.
Those have been airport vending machines for a long time.
Exactly. But I think what a lot of people forgot is that the problem with Cafe X is that it makes everything exactly the same always. And what a lot of people like about Starbucks is that customization, the personalization, the smell of coffee when you walk in, your name on the cup. Exactly. So for you, how are you going to invest in technology while keeping the human elements still there that a lot of people really like?
Yeah, so it doesn't go away, Jacob. So any in-restaurant customer that comes into the building will still be served by a team member. And that whole interaction of a little more, a little less will still happen. So the digital make line will only make orders that are coming through the digital ecosystem, which isn't consumer facing. So think delivery, order ahead, pickup. And so we feel confident that we don't detract from the overall customer experience by leveraging this piece of technology in the digital channel specifically.
Got it. Okay. And what about in terms of like data and AI? So we talked about the actual robots, right? The hardware. How much of what you're trying to build and create for the future of Chipotle is software? So for example, what sort of stuff are you tracking? Are you tracking, how many avocados, how much chicken? Like, is everything in some sort of a crazy analytics database where you as the chief restaurant officer have a dashboard and you can look at that and just get a picture of what's going on with the business?
It is, Jacob. We have data coming out of our ears, as you could imagine. I think the challenge for an organization like ours, and for many of the folks listening to this podcast, is how do I synthesize large volumes of data and pull out actionable insights that have a meaningful impact on the business, right? And so that's the leadership challenge. We are leveraging machine learning in restaurants today, whether that's algorithms around production and how we prep in the morning to support our volumes, and or sales forecasting and labor forecasting is all done through machine learning today.
Interesting. So it just looks at trends and helps. You should have this many people in this store, or you should order this much chicken today.
Correct. Absolutely. So we've had it in process now. We just launched system enterprise-wide a couple of months ago. But Kronos is the technology, and it's their Dimensions platform. And so just think of it as a spooled program where every restaurant funnels up to the cloud their actual performance over a said period of time. And then the cloud builds a model and then applies that model to each location individually based on that location's needs. And then we'll spit out a forecast for the upcoming week that is far greater than any human can pull together that data based on various touch points on how they're analyzing the sales forecast. And it does the exact same thing with labor today.
Wow.
And I think the evolution of machine learning / AI, we're only on the tip of the iceberg. And I think there's much more to come, whether it's traditional AI or generative AI, which I think is making a huge splash today and is spinning up very, very quickly.
For sure. So one more question for you before we get to the last part of the show, which I like to call the Leader's Toolkit. But before we get into that, one of the things that you mentioned is changes as far as leadership development goes. And so again, a lot of people who are listening and watching this are either in leadership development programs or they're responsible for creating leadership development programs. When you took over and you started doing all these things for Chipotle, what did you implement as far as leadership development that you think made a big change that maybe other people out there can implement in their companies?
Yeah, and so for a point of clarification, the development tools and resources have to be tailored to the level in the organization that you're designing for. And I think that's an important note. One of the things we did very quickly and very early on was we did a lot of personality testing, whether that was through Myers-Briggs or DISC profiling, because I think you have to teach someone about themselves before they can begin to learn and grow. And so
Interesting.
We spend a good bit of time helping people understand what makes them tick, how they operate, how they like to learn, what environment they learn best in. And then we apply the right leadership development resources based on the level they're in the organization. And so we have specific tools that teach team members how to become a successful general manager. And those can be in-house built curriculum around buddy to boss, right? How do I go from being your peer today to your boss tomorrow? And to keep in mind, our average general manager age is around 22, 23 years old.
Wow.
And so it's a pretty young cohort, and so it's really important for us to teach them leadership fundamentals at a very career young age, right? Not actual age. Age is not a factor in the equation, but in their career life cycle, so that they can learn how to lead teams, whether that's small teams in the very beginning to leading larger teams as they continue to grow and progress in their career.
Interesting. Yeah. So you do these personality tests. So you find value, I guess, in understanding, like you said, knowing, or the people need to know about themselves before they can kind of lead others, which I think is a fascinating approach. What other changes did you make? I mean, did you change the leadership program? I know you mentioned changing how many people or how many stores a person is responsible for. Did you make dramatic changes to the program itself as far as what you teach, the skills, the mindsets that you found important?
I did. So when I first arrived at Chipotle, I launched what we called Cultivate University.
Okay.
And so we built out a week-long curriculum made up of the things I've already discussed, Jacob, whether that's teaching someone about how to learn about themselves and how they operate, to advanced leadership development skills on whether it's situational leadership or how to lead large teams, how to grow others in the organization, how to lead from the middle of the organization. And so I brought every above restaurant leader to Denver, Colorado. That's where our office was based early on, and took them through a week-long curriculum just to build a baseline for the organization. And now Cultivate University still lives on, where we bring people to Orange County, now where our new office is located, and teach them, our high potential general managers, how to prepare for the next level, as well as field leaders how to prepare for their current role and how to think about, potentially being a director down the road.
Interesting. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk for the last few minutes. Again, a segment I call the Leader's Toolkit specifically, and I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this realm of accountability versus responsibility, something that you mentioned earlier, but I thought we could unpack it a little bit and try to put some practical steps that we can put into place. So for leaders out there, or even I guess for employees out there, for them to think about the difference between accountability and responsibility, it seems like, so accountability is the person who's actually responsible, like the person that you go to when something goes wrong or when something goes right. And responsibility is kind of like the people who are maybe implementing it, but it's the one point of contact that you go to, right? Okay, my conversation with Scott Boatwright continues, and you are not going to want to miss it. Since I interviewed Scott, he actually became the Chief Operating Officer, so he got promoted. And if you head over to greatleadership.substack.com and get access to the Leaders Toolkit, which is this bonus episode, only available for paid subscribers, you are going to learn about the difference between accountability and responsibility. We're going to talk about how to have honest conversations about performance with your people. And Scott shares an interesting approach that he uses inside of his company called the 4x4. And that is 4 questions that he asks 4 times a year. So if you want to learn more about what that is and how it works, become a paid subscriber. Join the community, greatleadership.substack.com. I'll see you there.